Hi everyone, it's me, Krylios, Team Rayceen Productions MC and producer. And joining me today is Sikivu Hutchinson. How are you?
Pretty good. How are you?
I am doing well. I am doing fine today. It's so great to have you here with us. And I want to begin a little bit with your background. Introduce yourself a little bit and yeah, tell me about your organization.
So I was born in South LA, and I am currently based in South LA. Grew up in the Inglewood area primarily, predominantly African American. Have been secular my entire life. My household was a secular one, and it makes it an outlier for most African Americans, which we'll
Yeah,
get
very
into.
interesting.
Yeah. So I came up in a household again that was primarily humanist oriented, social justice oriented. There was no religious indoctrination. And I had that as my guiding ideological and critical consciousness lens throughout my life, as well as being very much steeped in a Black feminist outlook.
Mm. Certainly. I like that. You're also an author. And talk to me about, the things that you write on. Talk to me about the themes that you like to capture when writing and the message that you want to give to the audience when you write.
So my primary areas of focus now are Black secular humanism, Black feminism, social and gender justice from an urban lens, specifically looking at South LA communities
Mm,
as it pertains to African American girls, sexual violence,
mm,
sexual abuse, domestic abuse, and intimate partner violence, and the ways in which those dynamics shape and inform their lives, in addition to looking at how they can develop youth leadership platforms
mm.
that challenge and disrupt those systems of oppression and misogynoir, which is anti-Black misogyny.
Ah, awesome. Now, talk to me a little bit about this. The way how, Black secularism, humanism, all of that really ties in with social justice work and the contrast between that and religion and its purported aims of helping people or whatever that may be. Talk to me a little bit about that dichotomy.
Well, Black secularism is really based upon this notion that religious systems and indoctrination are harmful to African Americans with regard to true liberation from capitalism, from segregation, from white supremacist oppression.
Mm,
And early freethinkers, Black secularists, and Black humanists, like A. Philip Randolph, like Richard Wright, like Nella Larson, Zora Neale Hurston, Hubert Harrison, James Forman, Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, the list goes on. These major thinkers were really pushing back against the regime of specifically Christian religious indoctrination and dogma because they perceived it as flowing from white supremacist, Eurocentric, colonialist, and imperialist traditions
mm,
that justified the enslavement of African Americans, justified the subsequent Jim Crow segregation of African Americans, and have really rooted African Americans in a belief system that is undermining when it comes to true liberation. Specifically, if we look at the ways in which we are so invested in propping up faith-based institutions and churches, often to the detriment of our socioeconomic well-being and
oh
enfranchisement.
yes,
The
oh
fact that,
yes.
let's look at some of the stats. 87% of African American women are faith-based. We know that, true to that old cliche, Black women have been the backbone of the church, consistently tithe to churches, consistently give their sweat equity to churches, are there ride or die.
Yeah.
And yet we see that African American women have some of the highest rates of sexual violence,
Mm,
highest rates of domestic violence, have some of the least wealth in the United States overall are increasingly being targeted by predatory preachers
Mm.
and really don't have any social capital at the end of the day when it comes to the leadership and authority in most mainstream African American churches. Now, obviously, there are exceptions. There are
Yeah.
churches and faith-based institutions that are led by Black women, but these are minority. And so, circling back to your original question, how does Black secular humanism and Black feminism tie into a contemporary challenge and disruption of Black church investment? We're really looking at trying to provide alternative systems
Mm.
that push back against the anti-Black misogyny that we see in churches, specifically when it comes to, again, honoring and enfranchising queer communities,
Mm.
honoring and enfranchising Black women and girls, away from these very hierarchical, masculinist, patriarchal systems
Yeah.
that are against the bodily autonomy of Black women and girls and queer folks and disabled folks at the end of the day.
Mm, I see, I see, I see. Really important. Tell me this. How does Black Skeptics LA how do Black Skeptics LA connect with the youth, like Gen Z, young feminists coming up, young Black feminists, young secularists? How do they connect with the youth in this day and age? And are the youth connecting with it?
So we've implemented a number of programs over really, gosh, the past decade, if you will. Specifically, again, in South LA high schools,
Hmm.
we have sponsored the Women's Leadership Project, Black Feminist Civic Engagement and Mentoring and Advocacy Program, which is a program that I founded in the early 2000s in the South
Mm.
LA middle school. And it has a humanist curriculum and a humanist engagement with, again, reproductive justice and bodily autonomy, sexual violence prevention education, and HIV/AIDS prevention
Hmm.
education for Black girls, Latinx girls, and other girls of color. That's been an ongoing program. In addition, we sponsor scholarships for first in the family young people.
Mm.
So the First in the Family Humanist Scholarship was started in 2013 with an emphasis not only on secular students of color, but also on young people that have been system involved, that are in foster care, that are undocumented, that are LGBTQI plus
Mhm.
identified. And the reason why we wanted to target and to lift up these demographics of young people is because these demographics are specifically criminalized and
Yes.
pipelined into prisons and juvenile institutions at disproportionate rates. And so if you do not have programming, wraparound programming that's culturally responsive and holistic and trauma informed for
Yeah.
Black queer youth, for example, Black queer youth are pushed out at greater rates than non-Black queer youth
Yeah.
in inner city and rural schools. I mean, this has been proven time and again. And so you have these interlocking factors of transphobia, homophobia, and criminalization, push
Mm.
out, and policing imposed upon the bodies of Black queer youth. And so with the First in the Family Humanist Scholarship Program, we wanted to foreground that disparity and
Mm.
say, we as a Black secular community are going to invest resources into lifting up Black queer youth and, again, the other populations of young people of color to redress the institutionalization and the perniciousness of the school to prison pipeline.
Ah, I see. Wow, that's really, really, really good work. That's really, really good work. And it's I for me, I guess personally, it's something that's so important for the future of the world, honestly, truly, because we need the young generation, the people moving forward, to have these ideas, because this is the way how we want to see the world progress and to run. So it's really great to have this, from such a pivotal point in a young person's life. Now, I want to talk about your book, Humanists in the Hood. Wow, this is a powerful cover as well. Wow, I love this cover so much. Yeah, talk to me about Humanists in the Hood.
So, Humanist in the Hood is an outgrowth of my earlier work. My first book was Moral Combat, Black Atheists, Gender Politics, and the Values Wars. The second book was Godless Americana, Race and Religious Rebels. And Humanist in the Hood brings it forward in terms of framing a Black feminist critique
Mm,
of the mainstream secular atheist movement. The,
yeah.
the mainstream secular atheist movement has been very Eurocentric and white dominated, primarily by white male exalted anointed figures like
Hmm.
Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and the late Christopher Hitchens. And these three figures were really pivotal to articulating a quote unquote new atheist standpoint that demonized organized religion, demonized communities of color, demonized Islamic communities, and demonized feminism. And so my charge in Humanists in the Hood was not only to disrupt and resist that narrative, but also to talk about the perspective of humanists from urban African American communities and other communities of color. The fact that we have been so marginalized and erased and invisibilized, and that there is this rich tradition of secular humanist resistance based upon Black liberation struggle, based
Ah,
upon anti-capitalist and anti-racist and anti-white supremacist, feminist, and queer affirming liberation struggle. And so these were the principles that I wanted to assert in contradistinction to what we are seeing in the mainstream atheist, secular, and humanist white dominated masculinist patriarchal movement.
wow, wow. And by the way, there's something I like the fact that the subtitle unapologetically black, feminist, and heretical. Choice of the word heretical.
So I was doing a sort of a playful gloss, if you will, in terms of this idea of a Black woman who is pushing back against respectability politics.
Hmm.
A lot of the policing that we see in our community really flows from this idea that Black women need to be on this moral pedestal, and that moral pedestal is enforced by being steeped in faith-based cultures, policing other Black folk in the community for
Hmm.
being queer, for being disabled, for being feminist aligned, not being middle class. So that was really a gesture towards that dynamic of enforcement, cultural enforcement, and respectability in our communities, as well as the way in which Black women are stereotypically perceived by the outside world, by white supremacist
Hmm.
society, and by the white gaze as being de facto religious and faith based.
I see. Well, as we move into a new year, especially in this country and a new administration, and some may say a new era. This year was just like a benchmark to transition to a new era. What are you looking forward to? What are your hopes when it comes to the socioeconomic, sociopolitical, progression of our society based on the fact that now we have a new administration and different things, all of these things coalescing at once, in a post-COVID, post-Trump, all of that type of world. What do you want to see?
Actually, that's a great question because I just dropped an article called Black LGBTQI Youth Mental Health and Resilience in the Pandemic. And so some of the things that I talk about are the fact that with the incoming administration and hopefully a new Senate that is Democratic based, that we will see some public policy shifts when it comes to upending the transphobic, homophobic public policies that the Trump administration have put in place. We will hopefully see the Equality Act come to fruition that is going to enfranchise LGBTQ folks in employment and housing and education. We will hopefully see a rollback of all of the anti-church state separation
Oh my
policies that
God.
Trump has slammed through. The unfortunate fact is that we do have a theocratic dominated Supreme Court. So there's going to be a stranglehold there when it comes to enforcing and lifting up church state separation, as well as obviously civil rights and LGBTQI rights and women's rights. So there's going to be continued friction and pushback with that Supreme Court, hopefully attenuated by Democrats gaining control of the Senate and Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, the climate change movement, holding the Biden-Harris administration's feet to the fire.
Yes.
I mean, keeping the pressure up, because we know that Biden and Harris are connected to a police state apparatus, have promoted police state policies, have not subscribed to the movement to defund police, much less abolish the police.
And fracking.
And fracking. I mean, there are numerous things that are problematic with that incoming administration. But at least there's a little light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to disrupting these extremely insidious policies put in place by the Trump administration.
Important. And I know we just talked a little bit about the incoming administration and, you know, its shortcomings coming in. But, you know, hopefully we can see some growth. When the Obama administration started, you know, he was publicly against gay marriage until, you know, some years afterwards. So, you know, we never know what the future holds. Do you, with a woman of color now being vice president, who knows? How do you see this change affecting, you know, everything that is going on? Or what do you hope to see actually from Kamala? That's the question. What do you hope to see from her as her time as vice president? And who knows what may happen in the future? What would you like to see in Kamala?
I would like to see greater emphasis on the lives of Black girls and the specific disparities that confront African American girls. So, for example, here in LA with the Women's Leadership Project, our youth are trying to put forward a task force that specifically focuses on Black girls' mental health, their challenges when it comes to educational access, the degree to which we have greater numbers of African American girls who are going through what has been dubbed the sexual abuse to prison pipeline, where they are sexual abuse victims and survivors, and they become ensnared in the juvenile justice system and in the adult incarceration system as a result of their trauma. The fact that there is no real apparatus within public education to account for the trauma and the inequities that are experienced by Black girls who are domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and sexual violence survivors. African American girls have some of the highest rates of sexual violence victimization in the nation. And yet you have movements like #MeToo, even though it was founded by a Black feminist, Tarana Burke, absolutely no foregrounding of the lived experiences and trauma experienced by African American girls. So I would like to see a greater emphasis on that. Certainly you have folks like Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, who put forward a bill in 2019 that Women's Leadership Project and Black Skeptics signed onto, that was designed to redress the disproportionate criminalization of girls of color, had an array of different initiatives and funding attached to that particular piece of legislation. So I would like to see Vice President Harris champion that type of legislation. In addition to, I mean, we don't have time on this call, but a whole array of policies that are going to address the fact that African Americans have the least wealth in the US, are struggling in this pandemic climate with being frontline workers, with being essential workers, workers that are not represented by unions, have nominal gains as far as wages are concerned, as far as benefits are concerned, and longevity and sustainability for Black communities when it comes to wealth creation. So I would like to see Vice President Harris actively and unapologetically pursue those policies
I love it. I love it. We have a black
against
person.
neoliberalism.
Yes, yes. Well, we have a black person, Biden, back in the White House. Let's see if they will try to fix what the first Obama Biden administration failed to do.
Yeah,
Listen, thank
a
you.
Herculean task.
A Herculean task. Certainly, certainly, certainly. Let us watch and see. Thank you so much for joining me today. It has been such a pleasure having you here. Before I let you go, I want you to plug anything that you want to. How can people find your books online, as well as your website and any social media you'd like people to follow you on?
Yes. So the website, SikivuHutchinson.com, is a good place to start. Also, blackskepticsla.org is the Black Skeptics website. I have a new book that is coming out in March called The Rock and Roll Heretic. There, the heretic word again. The Life and Times of Rory Tharp, and that is on an African American queer woman electric guitarist in homage to Rosetta Tharp, who is going through the trauma of racism, sexism, homophobia, and white supremacy in the rock industry in the late 1970s. And it looks at
Oh,
her arc. So that's on the horizon. Another website would be womensleadershipla.org. And folks can check into that website for all the work that we've been doing, organizing African American and Latinx girls here in South LA.
awesome, awesome. Thank you so much. And viewers, those links will be in the description. Thank you so much for joining me. It has been an absolute pleasure. And to our viewers, thank you for watching. Bye, everyone.